Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we get into tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I have used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value for my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them your unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would from any major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list priced against the specific condition of the card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Matt, piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Rograkh, son of Rograkh. This turbo deck seeks to land an early Underworld Breach or Ad Nauseam and win in the first few turns of the game. Matt's opening hand contains a Lotho Corrupt Sheriff, Badlands, Imperial Seal, Dothy Voidwalker, and his London Mulligans are Red Elemental Blast, Enlightened Tutor, and Twin Flame. Next, we have Ryan, piloting the partner pair of Tevesh Zot Doom of Fools and Kraum Ludovic's Opus. This is a Grixis Good Stuff deck that tries to control the board, draw cards with its commanders, and win with Oracle or Breach. Ryan's opening hand contains a Mana Vault, Wooded Foothills, City of Brass, Jataxian Probe, Time Twister, Mystical Tutor, and an offer you can't refuse. After that, we have Zeb, piloting Lotho Corrupt Sheriff. This is an Aristocrats deck that seeks to slow down the game while assembling infinite sacrifice triggers to kill the table with a Blood Artist. Zeb's opening hand contains a Polluted Delta, Kambal Console of Allocation, Plains, Vampiric Tutor, Crystal Vein, Reanimate, and a Skull Clamp. Finally, we have Zach, piloting Elsha of the Infinite. This Jeskai Spellslinger deck is looking to get its commander into play quickly and storm off by casting spells off of the top of its library. Zach's opening hand contains a Mox Opal, Jeweled Lotus, Marsh Flats, Felwar Stone, Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze, and a Savine's Reclamation. Without further ado, let's kick off this descent into delightful deodorized debauchery. Matt rolled that beautiful bean footage and gets to start us off. Matt draws a card for turn and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts Imperial Seal. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. He passes the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and starts off his turn by paying 2 life to cast Jataxian Probe. He looks at Zach's hand and draws a card. He plays a City of Brass for turn. He taps City of Brass to help cast Mana Vault. He gives the turn to Zeb. Zeb draws, plays a Polluted Delta, and ships the turn. Zach draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Soul Ring. In response, Zeb cracks his Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. Soul Ring resolves, and Zach casts Jeweled Lotus. He casts a Felwar Stone. He casts a Mox Opal. He sacrifices his Jeweled Lotus to help cast his commander, Elsha of the Infinite. Off to a great start, he ends his turn. Matt draws and plays a Badlands. He casts Dothy Voidwalker. He gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He taps the City of Brass to help cast his commander, Kraum Ludovic's Opus. He moves to Combat and attacks Matt with Kraum. Matt takes the hit, and Ryan passes the turn. Zeb draws and plays a Plains. He casts his commander, Lotho Corrupt Sheriff. He ships the turn to Zach. Zach draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He moves to Combat and attacks Ryan with Elsha. Ryan takes the hit, and Zach gives the turn to Matt. Matt draws and casts his own Lotho Corrupt Sheriff. He casts his commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. Both Lothos and Kraum trigger. Ryan draws a card, then Zeb and Matt lose a life and create a treasure. Matt ends this turn. During his draw step, Ryan takes a damage from his Mana Vault. He plays a Wooded Foothills for turn. He casts Mystic Remora. He moves to Combat and attacks Matt with Kraum. Matt takes it, and Ryan ships the turn. Zeb draws and plays a Crystal Vein. He casts a Soul Ring. Remora triggers, and Ryan draws. He casts Kambal, Console of Allocation. Both Lothos and Kraum trigger. Ryan draws, then Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure. Zeb moves to Combat and attacks Ryan with Lotho. Ryan takes the hit, and Zeb passes the turn. At the end of Zeb's turn, Zach cracks his Scalding Tarn, pays a life, and fetches up a Steam Vents onto the battlefield tapped. Zach draws and casts Ranger Captain of Eos. Ranger enters, and Zach fetches up an Esper Sentinel into his hand. He casts Esper Sentinel. Kraum and the Lotho's trigger. Ryan draws, then Zeb and Matt lose a life and create a treasure. Zach gives the turn to Matt. Matt draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Plateau onto the battlefield. He casts Wheel of Fortune, not paying for Esper or Remora. Cabal triggers, Zeb gains 2, and Matt loses 2. In response, Ryan casts Fierce Guardianship for its alternate cost, targeting Wheel of Fortune. Esper and Cabal trigger. Ryan taps the City of Brass to pay for Esper, then loses 2 life, and Zeb gains 2 through Cabal. Fierce Guardianship counters Wheel of Fortune, and Matt passes the turn. At the end of Matt's turn, Ryan cracks his Wooded Foothills, pays a life, and fetches up a Blood Crypt onto the battlefield tapped. During his upkeep, Ryan pays to keep his Remora. During his draw step, he takes a damage through his Mana Ball. He plays a Spire of Industry for turn. He casts Skull Clamp, and Zach draws through Esper Sentinel. Cabal triggers, and Ryan loses 2, and Zeb gains 2. Ryan chips the turn to Zeb, discarding to Hand's Eyes, exiling it through Dauthi Voidwalker. Zeb draws, plays a Marsh Flats, and passes the turn to Zach. Zach draws and casts Lotus Petal from the top of his library through Elsha. Remora triggers, and Ryan draws. Cabal triggers, and Zach loses 2, and Zeb gains 2. Zach plays an Exotic Orchard, and then gives the turn to Matt. Matt draws and casts his other commander, Tymna the Weaver. He moves to combat and attacks Zach with Dauthi. Since Dauthi has Shadow, Zach takes it. In his second main phase, Matt pays a life and draws a card through Tymna. He casts Hope of Girapur. Both Lothos and Kraum trigger. Ryan draws, then Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure. Matt ships the turn. During his upkeep, Ryan lets his Remora die. During his draw step, he takes a damage through his Mana Ball. In his main phase, he casts a Jewel Lotus. Cabal and Esper trigger. In response, Zach casts an Izzet Signet from the top of his library through Elsha. Cabal triggers, and Zach loses 2 life and Zeb gains 2. Izzet Signet resolves, and still in response, Zach casts Arcane Signet from the top of his library through Elsha. Lothos, Cabal, and Kraum trigger. Ryan draws, Zach loses 2, and Zeb gains 2, then Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure. Arcane Signet resolves, and with Zach's Esper Sentinel trigger still on the stack, Ryan decides to pay for it. Then Ryan loses 2 life and Zeb gains 2 through Cabal. Jewel Lotus resolves, and then Ryan sacrifices it to help cast his other commander, Tevesh Zot, Doom of Fools. Cabal and Lothos trigger, Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure through Lotho, then Ryan loses 2 and Zeb gains 2. Ryan activates Tevesh's first ability, creating 2/0/1 Black Thralls. He moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Kraum. Zeb takes the hit, and in his second main phase, Ryan plays a Polluted Delta. He passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Zeb cracks his Marsh Flats, pays a life, and fetches up a Godless Shrine onto the battlefield tapped. He casts Vampiric Tutor, paying for Esper. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library, loses 2 life, and moves to his turn. Zeb draws and casts Ranger Captain of Eos. Ranger enters, and Zeb fetches up an Esper Sentinel into his hand. He casts Esper Sentinel. Kraum and the Lothos trigger. Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure through Lotho, and then Ryan draws through Kraum. Zeb casts Skull Clamp, paying for Zach's Esper. He equips Skull Clamp onto Ranger Captain and ships the turn to Zach. Zach draws and plays an Arid Mesa. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. He passes the turn to Matt. Matt draws and moves to combat. He attacks Zeb with Hope of Girapur and Ryan with Tymna. They both take the hit, and in his second main phase, Matt pays 2 life and draws 2 cards through Tymna. He plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Human as it enters. He casts a Talisman of Hierarchy, paying for both Espers. Cabal triggers, Matt loses 2 and Zeb gains 2. He passes the turn. At the end of Matt's turn, Ryan cracks his Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up a Watery Grave onto the battlefield tapped. During his draw step, Ryan takes a damage through his Mana Vault. In his main phase, he activates Tevesh's first ability, creating 2 more Thralls. He casts Culling the Weak, sacrificing a Thrall as an additional cost. Zach and Zeb both draw through their Esper Sentinels, then Culling resolves, and Ryan adds 4 black. Ryan equips Skull Clamp to a Thrall, killing it. Skull Clamp triggers, and Ryan draws 2 cards. He casts Chain of Vapor, targeting Cabal. Cabal and the Lothos trigger, Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure, then Ryan loses 2 and Zeb gains 2. Chain of Vapor resolves, bouncing Cabal back to Zeb's hand. Zeb sacrifices a land, copying Chain of Vapor, targeting Dauthi Voidwalker. In response, Matt activates and sacrifices Dauthi, choosing Vampiric Tutor in exile. Then the Chain of Vapor copy fizzles. Ryan casts an Arcane Signet. He casts a Talisman of Dominance. He casts a Grim Monolith. All through, he gives the turn to Zeb. At the end of Ryan's turn, Matt casts Vampiric Tutor from exile through Dauthi. Both Espers trigger, Matt pays for Zach's, and Zeb draws. Matt then fetches up a card onto the top of his library, loses 2 life, and the turn moves to Zeb. Zeb draws and recasts Cabal, Console of Allocation. In response, Zach casts Brainstorm, paying for Zeb's Esper. He draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Then Zach casts Rite of Flame off of the top of his library through Elsha. Both Lothos and Kraum trigger. Ryan draws a card through Kraum, and Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure through Lotho. In response to Zach's shenanigans, Zeb sacrifices his Ranger Captain of Eos. Skull Clamp triggers, and Zeb draws 2 cards. Ranger Captain's ability resolves, and Zach's fun is stopped. Zach then adds 2 reds through Rite of Flame, and Cabal rejoins the battlefield. Zeb casts Arcane Signet, paying for Esper. The Lothos and Kraum trigger. Ryan draws a card, and Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure. Zeb casts Blind Obedience. He casts Reanimate, returning Ranger Captain of Eos from his graveyard to the battlefield and losing 3 life. Ranger Captain enters, and Zeb fetches up a Gravecrawler into his hand. He casts Gravecrawler. He casts Wayward Servant. He equips Skull Clamp onto Gravecrawler, killing it. Skull Clamp triggers, and he draws 2 cards. He casts Gravecrawler from his graveyard. Gravecrawler enters, Wayward Servant triggers, and each opponent loses 1 life and Zeb gains 1. With nothing else, he ships the turn to Zach. Zach draws and starts off his turn by sacrificing his Ranger Captain of Eos. In response, Zeb sacrifices his own Ranger Captain of Eos. Not to be stopped this time, Zach casts Jessica's Will off at the top of his library, choosing both modes, targeting Ryan, Elsha, Esper, and Cabal trigger. Zach loses 2 and Zeb gains 2, Zeb draws through Esper, and Elsha gets +1/+1. In response, Ryan taps his City of Brass to help cast Pyroblast, targeting Elsha. Both Espers and Cabal trigger. In response, Zach casts Winds of Rebuke, targeting Cabal, Elsha, Lothos, and Kraum trigger. Ryan draws a card, Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure, and then Elsha gets +1/+1. In response to wins, Zeb feels that the end is near, and he casts Angel's Grace, paying for Esper. Angel's Grace resolves, then Winds of Rebuke resolves. Cabal bounces back to Zeb's hand, each player mills 2. Then Zeb and Zach draw a card through their Espers, and Ryan loses 2 life, and Zeb gains 2 through Cabal. Still in response to Pyroblast, Zach pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep off at the top of his library through Elsha, targeting Pyroblast. Elsha triggers and gets +1/+1. Misstep counters Pyroblast, and Jessica's Will resolves. Zach adds 8 red, exiling City of Brass, Transmute Artifact, and a Braid off at the top of his library. Still in response to Zeb's Ranger Captain, Zach casts Final Fortune. Elsha triggers and gets +1/+1. Before his red mana fades, Zach casts a Braid from exile, destroying Zeb's Esper Sentinel. Elsha triggers and gets +1/+1. With no other actions from anyone at the table, both Ranger Captain's abilities resolve, locking out opponents this turn. Zach moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Elsha. Zeb blocks with his Wayward Servant. In his second main phase, Zach plays a City of Brass from exile. Zach passes to, well, himself. Zach draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. He casts Savine's Reclamation, targeting Ranger Captain of Eos. Elsha's Prowess triggers and gets +1/+1. In response, Ryan taps Spire of Industry to help cast an Offer You Can't Refuse, targeting Savine's. Esper triggers and Zach draws. In response, Zach casts Pact of Negation, targeting Offer. Elsha, Lothos, and Kraum all trigger. Ryan draws, Matt and Zeb both lose a life and create a treasure, then Elsha gets +1/+1. Then Pact of Negation counters an Offer You Can't Refuse. With Savine still on the stack, Ryan, not wanting to go down without a fight, casts Force of Negation, exiling a blue card, targeting Savine's Reclamation. Both Lothos trigger, and in response, Zach cracks his Bloodstained Mire, pays a life, and fetches up a Plateau onto the battlefield. He hard casts his own Force of Negation, targeting Ryan's Force. Elsha and Lotho trigger, Matt and Zeb lose a life and create a treasure, then Elsha gets +1/+1. Then Zach's Force of Negation counters and exiles Ryan's Force. Still in response to Savine's Reclamation, Zeb casts Reckoner's Bargain, sacrificing Gravecrawlers an additional cost. Esper triggers and Zach draws. Bargain resolves and Zeb draws 2 cards. Not finding an answer, Savine's resolves, returning Ranger Captain to the battlefield. Ranger Captain enters, and Zach fetches up a Dragon's Rage Channeler into his hand. He sacrifices Ranger Captain, locking out his opponents this turn. He casts Underworld Breach. Elsha triggers and gets +1/+1. Zach sacrifices his Lotus Petal to help cast Brain Freeze, with all copies targeting himself. He mills 24 cards. He escapes Lion's Eye Diamond. He sacrifices LED, discards his hand, and adds 3 blue. He escapes Brain Freeze, with all copies targeting himself, milling more of his library. Zach presents a loop of escaping Lion's Eye Diamond and Brain Freeze until Elsha's power is greater than the life totals at the table. He escapes Swords to Plowshares, exiling Elsha and gaining 25 life. He escapes Rolling Earthquake, where X equals 43, dealing 43 damage to each player, killing the table, and Zach wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what an amazing game. Congrats to Zach on his victory through multiple Ranger Captains. Even though he was going fourth, Zach's fantastic start put him as the favorite to win this game. While Zeb's Cabal was slowly draining the table, the pair of Lothos were making it rain treasures. Ryan tried to put up a fight to stop Zach, but Elsha's card advantage ability was just too much in the end. The most valuable card in tonight's game, sponsored by Luxury Playstyle, goes to Elsha of the Infinite. We were going to give it to Lotho in this game, but Elsha put in so much work. This Jeskai Commander gives you what every deck wants most, card advantage. Add Flash into the mix and you've got a nasty combo to power out wins when they are least expected. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time and we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.